The anime begins in the bustling city of Yokohama, where at first everything seems normal. At that time, people are just going about their daily routines, cars are buzzing down the streets. But then, out of the blue, a huge monster known as a kaiju bursts into the city, throwing everything into chaos and fear. Sirens go off across the city as the government springs into action. Soldiers quickly start moving people to safety in places called refugee camps. The news is buzzing too, and everyone finds out that this kaiju is a massive 60 meters tall with a strength rating of 3.5, which means it's big and very scary. This wild scene is even being broadcasted on TV, so people who aren't in Yokohama can see what's happening too. Just when things look really grim, the heroes of our story, the 3rd Division Defense Troops, come into play. Their main job is to keep Yokohama safe. They zoom in with a helicopter, trying to draw the giant monster away from the city to a spot where they can better handle it. In the midst of this intense drama, a brave female soldier from Division 3 steps forward. She's not just any soldier. She's Captain Ishiro Mina, the leader of the division. With incredible bravery and skill, she confronts the kaiju and incredibly, defeats it single-handedly. Thanks to Captain Mina and her team, the city breathes a sigh of relief. The people of Yokohama are extremely grateful, giving a huge cheer for Division 3, who managed to beat the monster without even a scratch. On the other side, there's a guy named Hibino Kafka, but people just call him Kafka. He's a worker who cleans up big monster bodies, called kaiju. At that time, Kafka and his team are about to start their work, but one of Kafka's friends gets hurt. Luckily, Kafka saves him, but then his boss tells him he has to clean up monster guts instead. In that moment, Kafka really doesn't want to, but he can't say no. Meanwhile, one of Kafka's friends tells him that new workers like him won't get to eat for a while. Long story short, now, Kafka was lying on his bed feeling exhausted. At that time, he can still smell the gross monster stuff. Then, he sees on TV that a super cool hero named Captain Ishiro Mina, who's only 27, just beat a bunch of monsters in Yokohama. Everyone thinks she's amazing and might become the boss of all the monster fighters. Turns out, Mina, the brave captain, was actually Kafka's childhood friend. As kids, Kafka and Mina made a pact to defeat all the kaiju together someday. But life had other plans for them. As adults, their paths couldn't be more different. Mina became a celebrated captain, admired by everyone, while Kafka ended up in a job cleaning up after the very monsters they dreamed of defeating. This realization hit Kafka hard, filling him with regret. The next day, Kafka was heading to his unusual job. When he gets there, he meets a new intern named Ichikawa Reino, who is eager to join the defense force, just like Kafka once was. But Kafka's coworkers tease him about his past dreams, which makes things awkward because Kafka had tried and failed to join the force himself. Feeling defeated, Kafka explains to Ichikawa that he did try his best but eventually had to accept his limitations, especially now that he's 32 years old. Ichikawa, however, doesn't get why Kafka would just give up and walks away, clearly upset and frustrated by Kafka's acceptance of his fate. Soon after, Kafka and his team got back to work. Today, Kafka and Ichikawa were tasked with cleaning out kaiju intestines, as usual. After they finished, they decided to relax in a nearby park. At first, Kafka couldn't help but feel a bit amused seeing Ichikawa struggle with the messy job on his first day. Noticing that Ichikawa wasn't feeling great and wasn't even eating his lunch, Kafka offered him some vitamins and a nose mask to help him get through the afternoon. Although Kafka initially seemed annoyed by Ichikawa, he actually cared a lot about him. As a helpful senior coworker, Kafka spent a lot of time guiding Ichikawa, helping him make it through his first challenging day. As the afternoon rolled around, Ichikawa finally felt grateful and sincerely thanked Kafka. He even shared some hopeful news with Kafka. The age limit for joining the defense force had been raised to 33 years. There, Ichikawa mentioned this because he remembered Kafka felt really down when he talked about giving up. Realizing Ichikawa truly cared about him, Kafka expressed his thanks. But just when everything seemed calm, out of nowhere, a kaiju appeared and attacked, turning their day upside down. At that time Kafka knew they were in danger, so he urgently told Ichikawa to run and get help from the defense troops. At first, Ichikawa didn't want to leave Kafka behind, but Kafka insisted. He told Ichikawa that he shouldn't lose his life in such a place, especially since he had big dreams to fulfill. Plus, they had no chance of fighting off the kaiju by themselves. In that tense moment, Kafka's thoughts drifted back to a sad memory with his childhood friend, Mina. They had both felt devastated when Mina's cat, Miko, died because of a kaiju attack. It was then they had made a heartfelt promise to join the defense force and fight against all kaiju together, even turning it into a friendly competition to see who could become a great officer. Back in the present, the kaiju was still on the chase. Just as Kafka was about to fight back, he was struck down and hurt his leg badly. It looked like he was going to be eaten by the kaiju, but then, out of nowhere, Ichikawa came back. He bravely fought the kaiju off with an iron rod. There, Ichikawa declared he couldn't become a defense officer if he just ran away and left Kafka in danger. Hearing this, Kafka was hit with a wave of sadness, remembering all the times he had failed before, and he felt completely useless, unable to even protect his junior. Just when it seemed like the kaiju was about to defeat Kafka and Ichikawa, out of nowhere, a white tiger appeared, followed by several shots that took down the kaiju. Their hero turned out to be Captain Ashiro Mina, along with her team from Division 3. However, when Mina saw Kafka, she didn't show much concern and instead directed her team to help the injured. The next day, Kafka and Ichikawa were recovering in the hospital. There, Ichikawa mentioned that if it weren't for Kafka's help, he might not have survived. He even told Kafka that he thought he was really cool. These words gave Kafka a boost of morale, reminding him of his old promise to Mina. Feeling grateful, Kafka thanked Ichikawa for helping him see things clearly again and decided to try once more to become a defense officer. But just as they were settling into this new resolve, Kafka suddenly transformed into a kaiju. Both Ichikawa and Kafka were shocked by this turn of events. At that moment, an elderly man appeared and quickly reported what had happened to the authorities. Then, the scene flashed back when Mina and Kafka were younger. Back then, Kafka promised Mina he would always be by her side. It turns out Mina still remembers this promise very clearly. However, she's really upset now because she feels Kafka didn't keep his word and thinks he lied to her. Just then, Mina gets a call about a kaiju appearing at the Yokohama hospital, and she prepares to rush over there immediately. The next scene shows Mina confidently leading her troops. There, she commands her division to quickly take down the kaiju at the hospital before it can hurt anyone. Soon, emergency sirens go off, and the government advises everyone in Yokohama to either evacuate to safe shelters or stay inside their homes, turn off all lights, and lock their doors tightly. Back at the hospital, Kafka and Ichikawa are in a panic after an old man suddenly shows up. Wanting to avoid causing more trouble, they decide it's best to leave the hospital quickly and stay away from where all the people are. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Captain Mina and her division were quickly heading toward the hospital. But suddenly, they got news that the kaiju had escaped from the hospital, and was now moving toward the area where people were evacuating. In a different scene, we see Ichikawa running through the night, his mind full of questions he desperately wants answers to. Wanting to be sure about what he's dealing with, Ichikawa decides to check if the kaiju behind him is really Kafka. But instead of finding clarity, he watches as the kaiju transforms into an even more frightening form. Just when things couldn't get weirder, Kafka, now fully a kaiju, declares that he needs to pee, which baffles Ichikawa because, looking at Kafka's kaiju form, there don't seem to be any typical body parts for that. Seeing Kafka panicking over this problem, Ichikawa tries to calm him down and urges him to leave the area quickly, feeling that they are still not in a safe place. At that moment, Kafka asked Ichikawa if he could still be part of the defense force. Ichikawa confidently said no, explaining that Kafka would likely be attacked right then and there. Realizing this, Kafka understood that his dream of catching up to Mina would never come true, which made him really sad. They then spotted a dividing line and decided to head there because Ichikawa thought it was a safe place where no people were around, so Kafka wouldn't risk hurting anyone. Suddenly, Kafka felt another kaiju approaching from underground, which he guessed might be the same type of smaller kaiju that had attacked them earlier. Hearing this, Ichikawa suggested it was their chance to hide, believing that with this new development, fewer officers would be sent after Kafka. Meanwhile, Mina received a signal about a new kaiju appearing elsewhere. She quickly decided to head to that new location, while some of her troops continued to pursue the first kaiju, who was none other than Kafka. On the other hand, a girl is crying next to her mom, who was seriously hurt when a large cupboard fell on her. Just then, a small monster called a Yoju appeared in front of them. Realizing the danger, the mom told her daughter to run away. It looked like Yoju was about to attack them, but just in time, Kafka showed up and hit Yoju with all his strength. Seeing Yoju wasn't defeated yet, Kafka told Ichikawa to quickly take the mother and daughter to safety, while he stayed behind to fight Yoju one-on-one. Then, Kafka managed to defeat Yoju with just one powerful attack. Although the girl was initially scared of Kafka's frightening appearance, she suddenly thanked him sincerely. This heartfelt thank you reminded Kafka of his childhood, particularly a similar moment with Mina. It made him imagine that he was fulfilling his promise to Mina, fighting side by side against the kaiju. Soon after, Kafka miraculously turned back into his human form. A short while later, Mina and her troops arrived at the scene. Soon after, Mina went over to the girl Kafka had helped to find out what had happened. Although the girl was calm, Mina tried to reassure her and promised to defeat all the kaiju. However, Mina was shocked to learn that it was Kafka, now a kaiju himself, who had come to their rescue. 3 months have gone by, and the story of Kaiju Kafka has become quite eerie. At that time, an old man, who was the first to see him, described Kafka's kaiju form as terrifying. The defense forces have even given him a nickname, Kaiju Number 8. And right now, his location is a mystery. He's being searched for all over Japan. Shortly after, Ichikawa received 2 letters from their manager. One of them was meant for Kafka. Since Kafka had been working since the early morning, Ichikawa was asked to hold on to his letter. It turned out that the letter was about the initial selection for the defense forces, and Ichikawa had passed. When Ichikawa went to give Kafka his letter, he noticed that Kafka had also passed his exam. However, Kafka didn't seem too excited about it. He explained that it was the second stage of the exams that he always found challenging. Ichikawa, concerned, asked Kafka if he was going to try the second test again, especially now that Kafka seemed to struggle with controlling his kaiju form. Now, Kafka was really set on passing this exam because, at 32 years old, he felt this could be his last chance. Seeing how determined Kafka was, Ichikawa promised that he would keep pursuing their shared dream, even if Kafka didn't make it, because he saw them as rivals. After Ichikawa left, Kafka actually felt a sigh of relief because he had passed the first part of the test. 10 days later, Kafka and Ichikawa arrived at the Tachikawa Defense Force base in western Tokyo to take the second stage of the exam. They weren't the only ones, cause other participants were there too. Suddenly, a girl approached Kafka and called him uncle. There, she wanted to park her car in the spot where Kafka's official car was parked, which was numbered 55. Then, she explained that she liked the number 5 because it was her lucky number for the day. When Kafka wouldn't move his car, the girl showed off her impressive suit, which looked like it belonged to the defense forces. With incredible strength, she tossed Kafka's car aside with just one hand, then introduced herself as Shinomiya Kikoru, another examinee with the serial number 2016. After hearing her name, Ichikawa looked really surprised because it seemed he knew Kikoru. But then, Kikoru sniffed Kafka because she smelled the scent of kaiju on him. Luckily, Ichikawa quickly explained that they had both been working cleaning up after kaiju, which seemed to satisfy her curiosity. Despite this odd moment, Kafka chose to show off his strength. Impressed by Kafka's abilities, Kikoru got fired up. Then, she boldly promised to outdo Kafka during the exam and then walked away with her servant. Soon after, 2 guards came over because of the noise from Kafka's car being moved, and they told them to head to the exam area. But despite his enthusiasm, Kafka was finding it tough to keep up with the younger participants. In the end, he ranked 219th out of 225, showing that his age might be catching up with him in this competition. Knowing that he was ranked much lower than her, Kikoru decided to embarrass Kafka in front of everyone. However, Ichikawa was happy to see that Kafka chose not to use his kaiju powers during the test, appreciating that Kafka didn't want to cheat when everyone else was working so hard. Elsewhere, Deputy Commander Hoshina was seen giving Mina some documents about the examinees. When Mina saw Kafka's name among the participants, she paused for a moment in silence, then asked Hoshina to continue with his report. At the same time, Ichikawa was updating Kafka about the other talented examinees. There, he talked about Ihara Furuhashi, the top graduate from Hokkyoji Neutralization Engineering University, who placed 3rd in the physical test. Then, Izumo Haruchi, the top graduate from Tokyo Neutralization University, and Kaguragi Aoi, a former member of the Japanese Self-Defense Force who was currently leading the physical exam. Many participants were wearing uniforms from various neutralization universities and aiming to become high-ranking officers. But the standout among them was Kikoru Kikoru, known as the most brilliant girl in history and the youngest top graduate from the University of California, only 16 years old. At that time, Kafka was quite taken aback to learn that the earlier girl was the strongest contender. Seeing Kafka a bit down, Ichikawa tried to cheer him up. He explained that the next part of the test, which involved handling kaiju bodies, was exactly why he had chosen to work part-time as a kaiju surgeon for the last 2 years. A little while later, they arrived at a massive gate where the next part of the exam was about to start. The supervisor this time was Deputy Captain Hoshina from Division 3. At that time, Kafka and Ichikawa were both shocked to learn that instead of dissecting kaiju carcasses as they expected, the test would involve neutralizing a kaiju threat. This sudden change upset Kafka and disappointed Ichikawa. Deputy Captain Hoshina then instructed all the candidates to wear special anti-kaiju suits made by Izumo Technology, called GX4552. When Ichikawa put on the suit, he was amazed to feel it almost merging with his body, giving him a huge boost in strength. Shortly after, a technician from the 3rd Division named Okanagi Konomi started measuring how much combat power each candidate could unleash. Izumo Haruchi managed to release 18% of his power, Kaguragi Aoi released 15%, Ichikawa Reino released 8%, and Ihara Furuhashi released 14%. Commander Hoshina explained that these numbers showed how much power they could exert through their suits. He was pleased because this year's recruits showed the highest combat power release values compared to previous years. But the biggest surprise came when Kikora managed to release an astounding 46% of her combat power. This amazed even Hoshina, as such a high number was typically seen in team leaders. On the other hand, Deputy Captain Hoshina was trying to cheer up Ichikawa, who was feeling down because he could only release 8% of his combat power. Hoshina told him that for a beginner, 8% was actually pretty good. It was far better than getting 0%. Unfortunately for Kafka, he did end up with a score of 0%, exactly what Hoshina had mentioned earlier. Seeing this, the deputy captain couldn't help but laugh, thinking that Kafka would surely be eliminated soon. Meanwhile, Kikora was getting irritated because she believed Kafka was hiding his true strength. With everyone in their combat suits, Deputy Captain Hoshina announced that it was time to start the final evaluation and led the participants to the exam venue. Once there, Hoshina explained that their targets for this test would be 1 large kaiju, known as Hanju, and 36 smaller kaiju, known as Yoju. The participants were equipped with anti-kaiju weapons to help them in the fight. Besides that, each participant would be followed by a drone that automatically monitored their movements. If the uniform shield had to be activated because a participant's life was in danger, that participant would be automatically eliminated from the test. Shortly after Deputy Captain Hoshina started the test, the participants quickly began searching for the kaiju. Among them, Kikora stood out as more dominant than the rest. On the other hand, Kafka struggled just to lift his weapon. During the test, Hoshina announced that Captain Ishiro Mina was also watching over the final exam and encouraged everyone to give their best effort. Motivated by this, Kafka, who didn't want to fail, took a moment to think calmly. He then noticed another function of the drone that was monitoring them. This realization helped Kafka think beyond just fighting. He shared his thoughts with Ichikawa, suggesting that the exam wasn't just about how many kaiju they could defeat. Kafka argued that if defeating kaiju was the only criteria, simple sensors would suffice to judge their performance. At that time, Kafka felt sure that the examiners were also evaluating how participants used their abilities and responded to the situation around them. Realizing their own strength wasn't the greatest, Kafka and Ichikawa decided to support their fellow participants who were actively engaging the kaiju, effectively becoming a support team. This strategy allowed them to contribute in a meaningful way despite their limitations. A little while later, Kafka and Ichikawa found some other team members struggling with a small kaiju, a Yoju. Kafka realized he had faced this particular Yoju before and knew its weakness. He noticed that the Yoju had very sensitive hearing because its eyesight was poor. Kafka then suggested to Izumo Haruchi and the others to aim their shots at the Yoju's stomach. Following his advice, they were able to defeat the Yoju quite easily. Deputy Captain Hoshina was impressed by Kafka's tactical knowledge. After that success, Kafka and Ichikawa hurried off to help other participants tackle more kaiju. But suddenly, an unexpected attack happened, and Kafka got hurt. In that moment, Hoshina was about to activate a long-range shield to protect him, but just as the Yoju was about to attack Kafka again, someone swooped in to save him. It was Kikora. When Kafka tried to thank her, Kikoro mocked him instead and walked away with a bad attitude. Because of the incident, Kafka discovered that he couldn't stand up cause his left leg was broken. In the operating room, Deputy Captain Hoshina informed Kafka that he had a serious fracture. Realizing the severity of his injury, Kafka felt that he didn't measure up to the other participants, especially since he could currently release only 0% of his combat power. However, Kafka decided not to give up. Despite his broken leg, he tried to stand again. Then, Kafka's power output, which had been 0, suddenly increased to 0.01%. This small but significant change surprised everyone in the operating room. At that time, Kafka, even while limping and in pain, told everyone that he would never give up. The scene then showed Kafka laughing with Ichikawa, though he was actually hiding the pain that racked his body. Seeing this, Deputy Captain Hoshina realized that Kafka was determined to continue with the final exam despite his condition. However, Hoshina warned Kafka that if he was in critical condition again, he would immediately activate his shield to protect him. Kafka was actually happy to hear this, feeling reassured by Hoshina's concern. He then remembered something Ichikawa had said before the exam started, that Ichikawa had promised to keep fighting alone if anything happened to Kafka. But it turned out Ichikawa didn't really mean it, because he suddenly reached out his hand and asked Kafka to fight alongside him. This gesture reminded Kafka of the time Ichikawa had saved him from a kaiju, helping him realize just how brave his younger teammate really was. Gratefully, Kafka accepted Ichikawa's offer to fight together. Moments later, Ichikawa, with full of fiery determination, hauled Kafka onto his shoulders and ran with him. The sight of their ridiculous but heartwarming teamwork left the other participants in disbelief and even made Deputy Captain Hoshina chuckle as he watched them from the monitoring room. Meanwhile, the other participants were busy trying to take down the kaiju. Kikoro moved swiftly and tackled the Yoju by herself, not allowing anyone else to help her. She quickly cleared all the Yoju in her area, known as the Delta area, and then prepared to face the giant kaiju. After Kikoro successfully defeated the large kaiju called Hanju by herself, the final evaluation officially came to an end. On another note, Captain Hoshina was surprised by how quickly the exam ended. He had expected that at least 30 participants would be eliminated, but as it turned out, everyone passed. He believed that their success was largely due to Kikoro, who was actually the daughter of the Director General, Shinomiya Isao. But just as he was reflecting on this, a humanoid kaiju unexpectedly appeared behind him and shot Kikoro in the chest with its finger, creating a hole in her left chest. Elsewhere, Kafka and Ichikawa were discussing how impressive Kikoro was. They were just waiting for the exam results, feeling fairly confident. However, Kafka was suddenly shocked to see one of the Yoju, which they thought had been defeated, getting back up again. In the next scene, we see Kikoro looking pretty badly hurt. Luckily, she managed to strengthen the shield over her left chest just in time, preventing the shot from reaching her heart. Even though the kaiju was talking like a human, which surprised Kikoro, she didn't believe it and felt she could still fight. She got back up and aimed her weapon at the kaiju. But the kaiju was faster and shot her several more times, leaving her in a critical condition. This caused a lot of panic in the monitoring room when Hoshina and the others noticed that Kikoro's vital signs were off. Unfortunately, because the drone had been pulled back, they couldn't see what was happening to Kikoro at that moment. To make things worse, the Yoju that had been defeated earlier mysteriously came back to life. At the same time, Deputy Captain Hoshina received news that the strength of the previously defeated large kaiju, Hanju, had suddenly increased to 6.4. In response to all this chaos, Mina ordered the supervisors to activate all remote shields for the examinees and to send drones back to get a clear view of the situation. Mina and Deputy Captain Hoshina then decided to head to the exam venue themselves to handle things directly. Eventually, all participants were told to evacuate immediately to the nearest safe area, but Kikoro, despite being badly injured, chose to ignore the order. The giant kaiju, Hanju, which she had previously defeated, was back up again, posing a threat to everyone around. Kikoro then remembered her father, who had always pushed her to be perfect for the sake of the country's future. Using her knowledge, she managed to stop her bleeding by using kaiju muscle fibers from her uniform. Just as she was gearing up for a quick attack, the Hanju struck back, sending her flying into the ruins of a nearby building. Lying among the rubble, Kikoro thought back to her childhood. She remembered feeling jealous of her school friends who received plenty of attention from their parents, unlike her, who was constantly under pressure from her father to be perfect. Not just for her country but also in memory of her late mother. Inspired by her father's expectations, she forced herself up to continue the fight. However, no matter how much she tried, she kept getting beaten down, until finally, after her right arm broke, Kikora seemed truly defeated, unable to fight any longer. At the same time, a drone located Hanju and Kikoru. In the monitoring room, Konomi watched with concern because Hanju was powering up to deliver a final, devastating attack on Kikoru. At that time, Kikoru felt a deep sense of disappointment, thinking she would never be able to fulfill her father's dream of her being perfect. Just as Hanju was about to unleash his energy attack on Kikoru, Kafka arrived just in time. Using his strength, Kafka managed to block the attack. Transforming into his kaiju form, Kafka thanked Kikoru for her actions, which helped ensure that all the other participants were safely evacuated. He then told her to leave the rest to him, indicating that he would handle the situation from here. Meanwhile, as the other participants continued their evacuation, Ichikawa was particularly worried. He knew Kafka well enough to realize that Kafka would resort to using his kaiju powers in such a desperate situation, especially to protect others. Back to Kafka and Kikoru. Kafka, realizing his secret was out, pleaded with Kikoru to keep what happened hidden from the defense forces. Just then, Hanju launched another energy attack, but Kafka managed to counter it effortlessly. He didn't have time to explain everything right then, but he promised Kikoru that he would tell her all about it later, especially since she was about to take down Hanju herself. Over in the monitoring room, Konomi was reporting a shocking development to Mina and Hoshina, who were on their way to rescue Kikoru. There, Konomi reported that a new kaiju, incredibly strong with a power rating of 9.8, had appeared near Hanju. Unfortunately, due to a poor signal, they couldn't see what was happening through the drone. Deputy Captain Hoshina was skeptical and thought the signal issue might be due to damaged equipment. Meanwhile, Kafka was preparing to confront Hanju head-on. Soon, they were exchanging blows. With a powerful strike, Kafka managed to defeat Hanju. Standing tall and a bit boastful, Kafka then taunted the fallen Hanju, daring it to stand up and fight again. After that, Kafka moved quickly toward Kikoru, but his target was actually a Yoja lurking behind her, which he knocked out with a single strike. Right after that, Ichikawa showed up and began scolding Kafka for transforming into his kaiju form during the exam. In the middle of their argument, Kikoru, who was already injured, passed out from her wounds. Just a little while later, Mina and Hoshina arrived at the scene of the battle. However, they didn't find any of the participants. Instead, they discovered the body of Hanju, which was completely destroyed, similar to an incident that happened 3 months ago. Hoshina then got a report from Konomi that 3 other participants, Ichikawa, Kikoru, and Kafka, had just made it to the 6th refugee camp. Initially, Hoshina felt relieved to hear they were safe. However, he expressed doubts about Kikoru's ability to travel so far given her condition, no matter how skilled she is. The scene shifts to Kafka, who is resting in the treatment room, with Ichikawa faithfully by his side. Then, Kafka opens up to Ichikawa, sharing how he always felt overshadowed by stronger people in his journey to achieve his dreams. But thanks to his ongoing enthusiasm, he was able to overcome these feelings. Kafka expresses his thanks to his junior, Ichikawa, acknowledging that his support was crucial in helping him get this far. Unbeknownst to them, Mina was listening to their conversation from outside the room. Soon after, Mina entered the treatment room to thank them for their role in saving Kikoru. As Mina was leaving, Kafka felt a strong desire to speak with her but decided to hold back, resolving to talk to her once he officially becomes a defense officer. Elsewhere, Deputy Captain Hoshina is visiting Kikoru, who is receiving intensive medical treatment. He came to let her know that there were no casualties in the incident, largely thanks to her efforts in defeating Hanju. Hearing this, Kikoru faces a tough choice about whether to tell a secret. However, remembering Kafka's kindness and bravery, she decides to keep the secret and takes full credit for defeating Hanju. The scene quickly switches to the humanoid kaiju that had appeared earlier. This time, it's oddly found listening to a radio channel in a bathroom. The kaiju seems confused after hearing on the radio that no one was hurt in the recent incident at the testing site. But then, it gets a phone call. When it answers, the kaiju transforms into a human appearance. It turns out, this humanoid kaiju is now disguised as a new member of the kaiju body cleaning team, blending in with the others as if nothing unusual had happened. The anime ends. The moral lesson from this anime is remember, even giant monsters need to eavesdrop and use bathrooms like the rest of us.